Hello class, and welcome to our video lesson on measuring an economy. So in this lesson we're going to be taking a look at several different ways of measuring an economy, but typically in class I like to start out with this question, okay? What makes a good economy? Do you think the United States has a good economy, and then why would you say that? Okay, so pause the video right here and reflect upon that question, or several questions actually. What makes a good economy? Do you think the US has a good economy, and then why do you think that? Okay? Challenge yourself to think about why you believe these things. So in this lesson, we're going to be taking a look at 6 main ways of measuring an economy. Okay? Now, by no means is this comprehensive or every single way of measuring an economy, but these are the 6 that we're going to take a look at. Labor productivity, gross domestic product, or GDP is what it's more commonly called, standard of living, inflation rate, unemployment rate, and consumer price index. So our first economic measure is labor productivity. Now, productivity is one of the vocab words for your vocabulary quiz. Labor productivity means it's the output per worker hour measured over a period of time. So how much of something is a worker producing per hour over a set period of time? Maybe they're only looking at 1 hour. Maybe somebody's measuring productivity over the course of a day. Maybe it's over the course of a month. Okay, it doesn't really matter how long the period of time is. It's just that it's a set period of time. Okay, countries and businesses with higher productivity, they produce more at lower prices. Why? Because they're more efficient. They're producing more items or more products per worker hour. That is efficiency. Okay, efficiency leads to lower prices. So an example here, if there's a Canadian worker at Toyota and they're installing 10 steering wheels an hour versus an Australian worker at Honda who installs 15 steering wheels an hour, who is more productive? Okay, think about that. Who is more productive? Who is producing more steering wheels per hour? It's the Australian worker at Honda. They're doing 15 steering wheels per hour, whereas the person at Toyota is only doing 10 steering wheels an hour. So they are more productive. Okay, specialization of labor increases productivity. Think of an assembly line, okay? If I am only doing one specific task, okay, I'm going to get really good at it because I'm doing it over and over and over again. If I have a whole assembly line of people that have specialized skills, okay, they only do one small thing, but they do it really well and they do it really fast, that's going to increase my overall productivity most likely, as opposed to, you know, one person doing a whole bunch of steps, but only doing each step kind of well. Okay, if we break it down into individual steps and we get people to do each step extremely well and extremely efficiently, that is going to lead to increased productivity. Our second economic measure is gross domestic product. Now, if you've ever heard of this on the news, you've probably heard the word GDP, okay? The acronym is what most people use to describe gross domestic product. But what it is, it's the dollar amount of goods produced in a country over a period of time. So think of every single thing that is produced in the United States over the course of a year. Okay, if we add every single thing up, and the total dollar amount, that would be the GDP of the United States for 1 year. Okay, GDP measures the amount of spending by people, businesses, and the government. Think about it. Businesses spend money on producing products. Government spends money on buying products. People, they spend money on buying products. Okay, the total amount of spending by all those 3 things, people, businesses, and government, if we add those up, that's how we get our GDP dollar amount. Okay, now this is a very simple example that I've put here in bullet point number 3, but it helps to illustrate what GDP is. Okay, so if the US government spends $100 trillion on US products, US consumers spend $500 trillion on US products, and businesses spend $300 trillion on making and buying US products, then the GDP is, well, what we would need to do is we would have to add up 100 trillion, 500 trillion, and 300 trillion, and we would come up with an answer for GDP of $900 trillion. Okay? We need to add up U.S. consumer spending, U.S. business spending, and U.S. government spending to get our total amount of goods produced in a country for the United States. Okay, the higher the GDP, that's the more output there is in an economy, and generally that is a reflection of a stronger economy. A strong economy produces lots of output. They produce lots of products that either people, business, or government want to buy or need to buy. Okay, so the higher the GDP, typically we say that's a stronger economy. Now, standard of living. This is our third economic measurement. It's a measurement of the amount and quality of goods and services that the people of a country have. Okay, how do we figure out what that is? Well, we would take our GDP and we would divide it per capita. Now, capita means per person. So if we have, say for a very easy example, say we have a country where the GDP is $100 and there are 100 people that live in that country, we would take $100 and divide it by 100 people, or capita, and we would come up with a GDP per capita of $1. Okay, $100 divided by 100 people would be $1 per person. Okay, that would be how we would measure the standard of living. Okay, now industrialized nations. Now when I say industrialized, I'm talking about economically advanced countries like the United States, England, Canada, for some examples. They have high standards of living, okay, because the countries produce a lot. Okay, their GDP is a lot higher than some other less industrialized nations. Okay, so when we take our GDP, which is a really big number, and we divide it by our people, we're going to get a higher standard of living. So now inflation rate. This is an important concept, okay? Inflation rate is basically the percentage increase per year of prices. Every year, prices tend to go up across the board. Okay, now in certain years, some prices may go down, but they're usually offset by increases in other products' prices. Okay, the goal for countries in regards to inflation is to keep their inflation rate relatively low. Okay, they want to try to keep it somewhere between 1 to 5% per year. That means that they want to make sure that the prices for items don't go up above 5% per year, generally speaking. Okay, so to illustrate the concept of inflation, what I have here is the cost of a cup of coffee. Back in 1970, the average cost for a cup of coffee was 25 cents. Today, in 2020, it's up to $1.59. Now, the coffee hasn't changed. Okay, coffee is exactly the same, but the price has gone up because of inflation. Okay, if we use coffee as an example, that's about a 3.7% increase in the price of coffee per year. Okay, so that is an inflation rate that countries would live with because it's between 1 to 5%. Okay, remember, inflation is caused by the fact that resources are scarce. We talked about that early on in this lesson. Okay, there's only a certain amount of resources. Okay, every year resources get consumed. Okay, as resources become more scarce or there's not as much of them, people have to pay more for those same resources. Okay, that's a major reason why we have inflation in the first place. Okay, so here I have another example for us to illustrate the concept of inflation. So back in 1970, the average home was $23,600. That was the average amount of money that you would pay for a house. Okay. Now back then, houses typically were smaller. Okay, the average house size back in 1970 was 1,660 square feet. Okay, so if we take the price of the house and we divide it by the square footage of the house, we come up with a price per square foot, which was $14.21. Okay, that square footage, or that price per square foot can be compared to the price per square foot in 2019. Okay, so in 2019, the average house price is $315,000. Okay, way higher than what it was back in 1970 of $23,600. But the average house today is significantly bigger. Okay, the average house size today is 2,584 square feet. Okay, but we can come up with a apples to apples comparison if we take the total price and we divide it by the square footage of the house. And we can see that in 2019, the average square footage price is $121.90. Okay, so if we compare $14.21 to $121.90, 50 years later in 2019, we come up with an inflation rate of 4.4% per year. So on average, houses have increased in value by about 4.4% each year. Okay, so if you look at this on the surface, you'd see, wow, houses were way cheaper back in 1970. Well, they were, but they were smaller. It's better to compare this on a square footage basis. Okay, and if we factor in inflation, we can see that the price of houses have been going up year over year, but by a relatively reasonable rate of 4.4%. Okay, so this is important to illustrate the idea of inflation. Okay, so the question that I get a lot is inflation bad? Well, no, generally it's not. It can be bad. Some inflation is okay. If we can keep that inflation rate between 1 to 5%, that's typically acceptable, and that's an okay increase in prices. Okay, it's not acceptable if inflation is too high. That's bad for everybody. Okay, imagine if only $100 bought you a candy bar. Okay, that would be terrible. That would be inflation that has it's called hyperinflation. It's when inflation increases way too fast, and that's not good for an economy. Okay, the money that the economy has or a country has no real value, and they can't use it to buy the things that they want or need. Okay, inflation can also be bad if wages do not keep pace. Okay, so if the salary that I earn or the money that I make from going to work increases 1% year over year, but inflation is increasing at a rate of 3%, I can't buy as much with my money, okay, year over year. The amount of money that I'm making is only going up by 1%, but the prices that I have to pay for the things that I want or need are going up by 3% because of inflation. Well, then I'm losing my ability to buy as much as I used to, and that's not really a good thing for consumers. So our next economic measure is unemployment rates. Remember, we want to try to keep our unemployment rates down in a country, okay? The unemployment rate is a measure of the people without jobs who want jobs. Okay, that's an important concept. It's not just everybody who doesn't have a job. These people that don't have a job, they have to actually want a job in order to be considered unemployed. Think about people that are retired or children who haven't reached 18. They don't have a job, but they're not considered unemployed because they don't want a job. Okay, normally the unemployment rate should be somewhere between 3.5% to 4.5%. That's what it's been historically in the United States, okay? High unemployment, that means that there's less people out spending money, okay, and the government is spending more on social services. Okay, if more people are unemployed, that means that the government is paying more in unemployment benefits to people. Okay, so that's more spending on social services. That is not sustainable in the long term. Okay, so the goal of countries is to keep their unemployment rates low and to keep them relatively stable. So our final economic measure is consumer price index. Okay, the consumer price index, it's a measure of change in prices of specific retail goods that the average house regularly uses. Okay, so what this means is there are people that go out and they measure the price of lots of different products. Okay, and then they compare the total prices to what the prices were in the past, and they see whether or not the prices have gone up or whether maybe they've gone down. Okay, and then that's the consumer price index. It's a measure of how much people are paying for the things that they regularly use. Okay, it's going to look at hundreds of different products across lots of different categories like food. Okay, so maybe people are going out and they're measuring how much does milk cost, or eggs, or bread, and then they're going to compare that to what those same products cost maybe a month ago or maybe 6 months ago to come up with changes in the consumer price index. Okay, they look at apparel, they look at transportation, they look at medical. Okay, so there are some examples listed on this slide that you can look at. Okay, generally the consumer price index, or the CPI, is going to increase more often than it's going to decrease. The reason for that goes back to the concept of inflation. Over time, things tend to get more expensive. Okay, so this concludes our discussion of the measures of an economy. If you have questions or something's not making sense, go back and rewatch the slide or the part of the video with the slide in it. And if you still have questions, reach out to me. Thank you.